So thank you very much, Center for Social Justice, always kicking us off with great music. So welcome to another rich leadership dialogue put together by the Center for Social Justice. So we will start with a few housekeeping announcements. To be able to improve sound quality, if you can mute yourself, especially when you're not speaking, that would be helpful, so that the speakers would be the only ones who are unmuted. And then sometimes if the speaker is experiencing some instability on their end, again, it will be helpful if you could take yourself off video. We will start off with video, hoping that the bandwidth can sustain it. But if we are having challenges along the line, it would be good to take yourself off video. The third point is that often, for those who have attended the leadership dialogues put together by the Center for Social Justice, these are very interactive sessions. So there's a chat function in Zoom. Kindly make use of it. You can type in your comments. You can ask your questions there, and the moderators will do their best to be able to bring them into the main discussion. And some may be called upon to also ask these questions very directly. And getting to the tail end of the program, our technical team would type in a survey link into the chat function for you to be able to fill out the survey. So that will be chatted in, but more will be said about that a bit later on. So again, if you are not speaking, if you could kindly mute yourself so that there are no disruptions from the background, that would be very helpful. Okay. So this is the 7th leadership dialogue, and almost every month, the center has brought you very invigorating discussions with prominent national leaders who are driving change in their own spheres. So if CSJIT could kindly help mute some of the mics which are causing some. Excellent. Thank you very much. I think that's much better now. So every month, the Center for Social Justice brings you these very stimulating national discussions, and they impact policy to various extents. Last month, we had a very great discussion on the Supreme Court ruling, and the center is at the moment compiling a position paper, making recommendations for reforms in the electoral processes, which would be submitting to the Electoral Commission. But today we have a totally different topic. As many of you know, March is the International Women's Month, and it's being celebrated under the theme, Women in Leadership, Achieving an Equal Future in a COVID-19 World. And the COVID-19 pandemic has affected all walks of life, and women have been most affected. The UNDP has come up with a gender tracker, looking at how many countries have factored in gender initiatives into their country responses. And according to that tracker, Ghana has not done such a great job of factoring in these gender considerations. Today, we are going to delve into the issues of how women in great positions of leadership are impacting and reducing the effects of COVID on various walks of life. And I am glad to be supported by a very able team. We have Priska Atoxia, who is providing technical support. And then also we have Stephen Kemeche and George Ferguson Lane. I'm very happy to be co-facilitating the session with Dr. Amanda Kofi, who is a research fellow at the Legon Center for International Affairs and Diplomacy. So Amanda, if you can come on camera, I'm glad to be doing this with you. How are you doing today?
I'm doing quite well. My camera is not holding the best quality, but I'll try it. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and we are glad you are able to join us this evening for our discussion. And we look forward to a very interactive and stimulating discussions that would have some implications for our policy in terms of having gendered policies that addresses some of the challenges that our speakers will be enumerating with concern to women issues, and also having a more gender-friendly policy. So I look forward to our discussions. And so for this evening, The reason we are having this, as Soji has already enumerated, is for us to celebrate the International Women's Day and to kind of bring together all activities that has gone on throughout the month of March. So we are discussing how women's leadership contributed to the protection of marginalized groups within the health sector for us. And we are also interested in understanding the differences that representation of women on the various committees that is at cabinet made in integrating gender in our responsive mechanisms. How has the pandemic affected women workers in the labor market, and how we can address the challenges going forward? And finally, what the last objective that we have for this evening seminar is towards having a more gendered analysis of government responsive mechanisms. It has been quite challenging to get information on some of these issues. So we are privileged to have with us individuals, and particularly women who have been involved in these areas, to share their perspective with us and give us some insight on, as has been noted, this pandemic is gendered, and our recovery has to be gendered as well. So we are hoping to contribute towards that discussion this evening.
Excellent, thank you, Amanda. And especially as women, by the data, are said to be more adversely affected than other socio-demographic groups. So we shall get into it right away. And our first speaker for today will be Bashiratu Kamal Muslim. We will give a little bit of an intro to her, because one of the key things that many people take away from these dialogues is the inspiration factor. So Bashiratu is a gender equality, social inclusion, and labor specialist. She currently works full-time as a gender equality officer with the child labor team of the TUC. She has a master's in professional studies from the Pennsylvania State University in the US, and has an additional diploma in development leadership from the Coady International Institute at the St. Francis Xavier University in Canada. Perhaps most importantly, she's a council member for the Center for Social Justice and the fellow leading the gender and social inclusion pillar. So over to you, Bashiratu Kamal Muslim.
Okay, thank you so much, Soji. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Okay, thank you.
Yes,
I'm not too sure about my network, so I'm trying not to use video as much as possible. So I'll probably use it for some time, and then I will go back to not using video. Thank you all for joining us and accepting to be part of this session, especially to our panel. We are grateful and noting also the factors that impede women's participation in most of these activities. This is a peak period where most women will go and pick their children from school and do other unpaid care services as society has bestowed on us. And we are happy to be discussing this particular topic. And as today marks the end of March and the end of the Women's History Month, we are particularly also happy because we are giving people takeaways from the month, from all the activities that has gone on. So for a brief, Soji has already given a brief about the theme for the month, and it is important that we reflect on this theme using our own political landscape and our economic landscape. When I talk about political landscape, I'm talking about women's representation in the legislature, in the judiciary, and in the executive arm of government. Presently and sadly, the last appointment our president made, we only had 6 out of a huge number of men being appointed as substantive ministers. And we just had just one woman representing and being appointed as a regional minister. Sadly, for about 5 years now, the gender ministry, which is the ministry that has the sole responsibility of representing marginalized groups and their issues, is not a member of cabinet. What does this mean? This means that they need to do an extra work in ensuring that issues affecting marginalized groups, with special emphasis on women and children, not forgetting the intersectional nature that women's identities are intertwined in terms of women living with disability, women in the informal sector, and women in various sectors who are more marginalized than other women of other status and class. So this year we are happy to be part of the celebration. And let me say that when COVID struck in 2019, it was like a game that most people kept watching on CNN and BBC making comments, and we never thought that it was going to travel to us. But here we were in 2020 March when we recorded our first 2 cases. And immediately government began putting measures in place and containment and responsive mechanism. What is sad is that this mechanism put in place by government was not gender sensitive. They were not gender responsive. This is because it didn't integrate gender. Why? Because the representation of women didn't matter. At the time, even though the gender ministry is not a member of cabinet, did that reflect in the committees that they formed? Yes, it did, because the gender ministry was not immediately, we didn't say that this is an emergency, so let's change the system. We put in place restrictive measures and we passed the Restrictive Act. This also did not reflect the needs of women, because in emergency cases, you need emergency services, and institutions and organizations that are providing emergency services were not even given that status that makes their services like emergency, like CSOs and NGOs that are responding to issues around sexual and gender-based violence during the partial lockdown and beyond it. Also, our government formed a COVID committee, which was chaired by a woman. Unfortunately, the representation of women on that committee was nothing to write home about. So what does it mean? It tells us that we have been talking about gender for all these while. Our president is the gender champion. We have a fantastic gender policy. We are pushing forth a lot of things around gender issues, but we are not walking the talk, which is very sad. And the containment measures mainly are social distancing measures. Also the partial lockdown that came in, and issues around wearing of nose masks, social gathering, and other things. It did not integrate gender. And how does it affect us? If you go to our market, that is where we have about 90% of women as players in the informal sector. And that informal sector employs almost about 85% of workers in the labor market. And this is a sector where you find that it is not well planned. So you go to the market and people are sitting closely, people are selling. What does this social distancing measure means to them? How does it affect the livelihood of other women who might not be able to come to the market to sell? And we all saw that during the time of the partial lockdown, government tried to say that, well, women selling foodstuff, perishable goods and provisions are considered essential, so they should be allowed to go to the market to sell. Unfortunately, we witnessed a lot of harassment and a lot of violence from our security agencies who prevented some of these women from accessing their wares in the market. Apart from that, the markets try to run a shift system. This shift system, what does it mean for women who are selling perishable goods? So you have a host of women who lost their livelihoods and their capital because they lost their goods. If it's tomatoes you are selling and you've not been to the market for 3 days, what does it mean for your wealth? If it is pepper or onions, what does it mean for your wealth? Meanwhile, this emergency, this COVID came with economic devastation, and not just in Ghana, it is worldwide. And it also affected humanitarian services because most countries decided to cut funding in foreign aid, like the US government did, cutting about 2.9 billion, resources that they put in humanitarian services. Most of these non-governmental organizations and CSOs did not get funding again, even for ongoing projects, because everyone was thinking about themselves in their countries. And there was also a lot of pressure on our institutions, mainly the hospitals. And how does our hospitals look even before this pandemic struck? What are some of the matters arising, from all these things that I'm talking about? Job losses, Some companies decided to do redundancies, others did layoffs, others folded up, others just did downsizing, and others just closed business. And we know that in Ghana today, it is difficult for a woman to get a job. It is difficult for a woman to sustain herself whilst working. And it is very difficult for a woman to even earn a living wage because of our reproductive roles that we play in society. No employer wants to be responsible for a woman who is pregnant or who has given birth, because you are thinking about the bottom line and how your status affects the organization. In terms of job losses, it is very serious and difficult also because a lot of women themselves exited the labor market because they were forced to choose between child rearing and building a career. We all know that the closure of school came 2 weeks prior to the partial lockdown. And it meant that for all those people who had the services of other people in schools, crèche, daycare centers, normal basic schools, were forced to take leave days to go home and care for their children. Unfortunately, 2 weeks leave means that is 10 working days. And according to our Labor Act 651, the minimum leave days you can give a person is 15 working days. That is the minimum. And that is what most employers play with. So if you had 15 and you had already spent 10, it meant that you had 5 left. And the partial lockdown came, which was extended for another week, which was 3 weeks. That meant 15 working days. And almost all employers in Ghana decided to use the annual leave days of workers to take off the cost of the partial lockdown. So no employer was responsible for the number of days people stayed home, even though most people were still working from home. And it meant that after the lifting of the partial lockdown, most women were left wanting, because who do you take your children to so that you can go back to work? So most were forced to choose between going back to work and staying home to take care of their children, or paying extra money to nannies and other domestic care services givers who were willing to take in their children. And this also meant the issues around insecurity for some of the girls that we have. And then we have issues around income security, and income security in the sense that if you are thinking about how to sustain yourself, you need money to sustain yourself, and you are having to leave the labor market. It meant that you are not going to have any money. And when you talk about decent work, you are talking about income and job security as well. I've already spoken a bit about the informal sector, where people lost their capital. And then there was also an issue around access to markets and food stuff. Then the harassment from security agencies, I've also touched on that. Then we had issues around access to sexual and reproductive health services for women during the lockdown and after the lockdown. I mentioned earlier that the Restrictive Act 1020 didn't incorporate service providers like Marie Stopes, who are providing services around sexual and reproductive rights, like family planning issues, other abortion services and other things. So it meant that people even missed out on their plan if they are on any family planning services. And it was very difficult for people at the time. That is what is accounting for the upsurge in pregnancies, teenage pregnancy, and other women getting pregnant. And also the attendance of our hospitals to just emergency cases. Before the partial lockdown, the Komfo Teaching Hospital recorded cases of COVID and decided to shut down OPD services. So they were attending to emergency cases. So you might be pregnant maybe in your second trimester. If you are not emergency, what are you going to do at the hospital? Emergency cases involve maybe pregnant women who were going in to deliver or who had maybe a scheduled surgery. Then issues around the rise and upsurge in sexual and gender-based violence in Ghana. Research are ongoing. A lot of people are doing research to ascertain the numbers, but we know that there was an increase in cases, and I have done 2 research. One is currently still ongoing for FIDA. And in that research, we are looking at women and girls in emergency, and we have most of these NGOs recording several cases, but they were not able to provide services to the people, aside people calling through their hotline. Why? Because they were not able to go closer to people. There are issues around testing of people and how people were able to have access to these testing facilities. Issues around their own accessibility to those people in terms of traveling without any harassment from security agencies. Issues around shelter provision. If somebody has an issue and is being, and let me also state that all the violent cases that half of these NGOs and CSOs recorded were issues around IPV, intimate partner violence. Because of the lockdown, couples were spending more time. People in relationship were spending more time together, and the economic stresses were having a toll on people because there were issues around having kids at home, kids eating more, and you are spending more. You know, your budget, you are totally completely thrown off your budget, and it was all an issue. So it was compounding issues around violence in the home, and a lot more women were culprits, including young girls and children. So issues around shelter, currently in Ghana, there are about just 3 shelters. And the sad part is one shelter which was built and donated to government by Action Aid Ghana was also converted into an isolation center because government said they didn't have a place. But in a country where you are recording cases and you know that GBV is already an emergency situation, and in the time of the partial lockdown, the UN had already declared that it had become a shadow pandemic since more and more cases were being recorded. But our government found pleasure in converting a center, a shelter, to an isolation center. So where do you put women who were running away from their abusers, their people who were harassing them, and people who were actually maltreating them in their homes? Then we have access to stimulus package. Government announced that they were going to give a stimulus package, which was being run by NBSSI. But we asked the question, what are the processes? How many market women who were affected by the pandemic, the economic devastation, are able to access this fund? And there's processes leading to you applying. You know, it's a very cumbersome, the bureaucratic nature. You need certain documentations to be able to do that. But this was not different from people in the informal sector and people in the formal sector. So a lot more women are recording that they were able to access as low as 500 cedis and 200 cedis. Hardly would you find a woman telling you that I was able to access 2,000 or 5,000 Ghana cedis. Issues around protection of the employment of women, either in the informal sector or the formal sector. Employers are still saying that they have suffered from the pandemic, and people are still pushing ideas around redundancies and layoff. What are some of the issues falling out of this too? Our government has failed that. The 1992 Constitution provides that we should have a child care facility at all workplaces, but no government institution as we speak has any. If they did, when the partial lockdown was lifted, women will be comfortable going to work and leaving their children in these child care centers so that they will also go about their duties. And let me also say, sadly, that we have recorded a very high increase in issues of around teenage pregnancies. And now that schools are back, a lot more girls are not going back to school. And for those going back to school, the system and the structures are not accommodating to them. For instance, look at some of the desks that we use in our classroom. If a girl is pregnant, is she comfortable enough sitting and using that desk, you know, to learn? Issues around stigmatization. GES say they have a re-entry policy guideline. How effective is the implementation of the policy guideline when we still have headmasters and some teachers using their religious and moral tax, you know, to stop girls from coming to school because they feel that these girls have gotten pregnant and they are disgraced to the school? The matters arising from that is also the fact that nobody is asking the questions about how the girls got pregnant. Everyone is just seeing the girls as being bad girls. You have girls 14, 15, 16, 17 getting pregnant. And for girls below 16, we all know is a case of defilement. And you cannot say they gave you consent under any circumstances. Instead of us even looking beyond the pregnancy to looking for the perpetrators, we are not talking about it. And these perpetrators are just walking free. There's also the gender tracker that Dr. Soji mentioned, and the gender tracker developed by UNDP to track how governments in countries were doing with handling COVID cases and protecting women. So it highlighted responses from African governments and looked at how they integrated gender. So they were looking at issues addressing women's economic and social security, including women's unpaid care work and the women's participation in the labor market. They also look at issues around violence against women and girls. And if you look at the gender tracker, even though Ghana had 5 containment measures that were major, Ghana had, it called 0 in violence against women and girls. We scored 0 in practically everything that the tracker was doing. And it meant that we are not committing enough to issues around women. And the UN has stated that in issues of emergencies and towards times where we have pandemics, women and girls are always at higher risk of domestic violence and also at a higher risk in terms of abuses. What are some of the cases? The high rates of violence I've mentioned, no shelter, status of CSO, some workers of social welfare were given the essential worker status, but it was not extended beyond government institutions. And even for them, they said they couldn't work much because when you call them, they are afraid that they might contract the disease from you. So it's difficult for them to come when you have not even tested. And we all know the testing situation in Ghana and how it went. Why do we need women? We need women because if government had consulted women's groups and the ministry and other stakeholders working on women and people living with disability very well, you would have noticed that we would have responded like the way South Africa, Nigeria, Zimbabwe, and other countries did. South Africa declared GBV a pandemic during the time. Government had buildings allocated as shelters for women. Government was booking Airbnb accommodation for women who were escaping from their abusers, and government was providing more support. There were courts sitting on daily basis to address cases of rape, defilement, and other domestic violence. Same in Zimbabwe, same in Nigeria. Why was our case different? Issues around presidential addresses. If the president was consulting enough and enough research had been done, none of our presidential addresses or speeches address issues around women specifically. There was no mention of gender-based violence. There was no mention of sexual harassment. There was no mention around matters arising like job losses for women, teenage pregnancy, and how we were even going to deal with it. We need to take inclusion seriously because even for women, there are the intersections of women living with disability, women and religious discrimination, and other issues. And we need better gender responsive mechanism and intervention to be able to address this. We are saying this because we do not know when another pandemic will strike. We do not know when we will have another emergency. And we need to drum it home that in all instances, inclusion is key. Thank you, Dr. Soji.
So thank you very much, Bash. Thank you for outlining some of the challenges that women face during the pandemic. And we are grateful for your insights into that. So we'll move next to Dr. Hawa Malaki, who is an obstetrician gynecologist at Tamale Teaching Hospital. She's also the clinical coordinator for her department, and she doubles as an assistant lecturer also at the University for Development Studies School of Medicine. Dr. Malaki is also the chairperson for Medical Women Association of Ghana, that is the Northern Sector. She graduated on top of her class at the University of Ghana Medical School, winning 10 prizes, including the overall best student in Part 1 and Part 2 examination. And so with such credentials, she has since moved to Tamale Teaching Hospital, where she works with basically women and deal with women issues. So today we are glad to have Dr. Malaki with us to talk to us about the medical aspects of the pandemic in relation to women, how women were able to access healthcare. I know Bash spoke a little bit about that, but Dr. Malaki would give us more insight to it from her position as somebody who was right at the front of this pandemic. So Howard, thank you very much for joining us this evening, and the floor is all yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, loud and clear.
Very well.
Okay. And can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Thank you very much for the introduction. So I'm going to spend a few minutes to talk about the healthcare leadership so far as the pandemic is concerned. My sister Bashira has given us quite a gloomy picture of what women have gone through ever since this pandemic started. Let's look a little bit about what women in the health sector also were able to do and how the whole pandemic affected women in general. So like she said, the world started hearing about this pandemic somewhere in 2019, and we all thought it was far away from us. And little do we know, it was like a bad wind blowing from the east to the west and also to the south. And in March, the World Health Organization declared it a pandemic. And in Ghana, we recorded our first case in March, as well as other West African countries in the region. And as expected, it was a panic mode for everybody. So close down, lockdown, shut down, everybody was screaming on top of their voices. And restrict movement, close schools, run special shifts at work, and all sorts of things were being said. Government was listening to some of them, copying rightly, copying wrongly, altogether. Bashira has said them. But little did we put into consideration how all these affected women. Because so far as women were concerned, in the home, suddenly the children were not going to school. So you had to deal with the kids. And lockdown was in the bigger cities. So we, those who were outside the big cities, Kumasi and Accra specifically, where there was no lockdown, you had your kids staying at home, you have to care for them, and yet you have to go out and go to work. So how do you deal with children who have to be at home if you do not have an emergency plan in place to deal with that? And then the other aspects that affected women is women as caregivers. We all accept that when it comes to giving care, all sorts of care, whether care for the young ones, care for the elderly, care for the sick, it always falls on the laps of women. So women had the added responsibility for looking out for all other groups of people and still had to deal with their work accordingly. So if you look at the healthcare sector, they had to struggle with, children at home, caring for husbands who were not going to work, and also perhaps the healthcare workers, we didn't have any breaks at all, so you still had to forge on and go to work because you were much needed. And like she rightly put it, if you come to the healthcare sector, because of the panic mode everybody ran into, there were sudden restriction of services. So suddenly antenatal clinics had to hold on and restrict the numbers that would come to the antenatal clinic. Definitely you would miss out on some women who had needs that they themselves could not recognize, and for that matter, would not come as an emergency. Once we had done the restrictions, these women were only going to come to us at the end when we have a bad outcome. And in my hospital, for instance, during the time that we had these major restrictions, severally, we recorded women coming with prolonged pregnancies that had lasted over 42 weeks. Some of them, their babies were already dead inside. And I mean, complications were abound. Reproductive health services equally was affected. So women could not access family planning services. Comprehensive abortion care services were equally affected. Even child welfare clinics, we had to restrict child welfare clinics to only immunization schedules. So you come to the hospital and your book will be looked through. If your baby is due for immunization, then you pass through the gate. If you are not due for immunization, you go home. But we all know that child welfare clinics go beyond just immunization. We pick up growth problems during that time so that early intervention can be put in. But all these had to go on hold. So the pandemic really affected women and affected children together. Coupled with the low purchasing power, things became increasingly difficult for women in all spheres because if you were running a business, the number of people who even come to you are reduced. If you are marketing perishable goods, you were allowed to go, but you have to run shifts. If you are not careful, you lose your income, and then you also lose your capital in the process. And rightly put by Bashira, there were a lot more cases of domestic violence. So we were seeing them coming to the emergency room, beating, hurts, rape, defilement, and so on and so forth during this period, because people were forced to live together for longer periods of time, and then tensions had to be managed for a longer period of time. So you had more cases of such being reported every now and then. For women who were in the health sector facing the pandemic directly, the fear was really very, very clear on our faces. When you go to work, you are so much afraid of contracting the virus, because in the initial stages, we really did not know how the virus, one could contract the virus. The statements kept changing week after week, day after day, whilst you watch television and listen to news. And the anxiety of getting your family infected in the process, if you get yourself infected, was quite high. And sometimes you come home and you do not want to disclose to your spouse that you attended to a COVID positive person, because you do not want to increase the anxiety in the house, you know. Coupled with the mixed, the desperation about lack of appropriate PPEs to work with. In the beginning of the pandemic, people ran out of face masks, ran out of gloves, ran out of hand sanitizers. Everything was ×4, ×5 in the market. Even hospitals could not get all these things to buy, to give to their staff to use. And all this brought in the fear and desperation when you go to work and then meet potential positive cases. You really don't know whether to go forward or come backwards. The president kept giving us the 2 weekly, I don't know what to call them, 2 weekly presentations of his plans for the country. And there was lack of clarity when it came to incentives and insurance packages to healthcare workers. And you know, for we women, if you have to take a further step forward to carry such a burden, and you are not very certain that when you are unwell or your family is unwell in the process, there is an insurance package that can take you through, it is really, really disturbing. We have stories of healthcare workers who have contracted this virus, and they have to pay out of the pocket for very high cost investigations and medications, and there seems not to be nothing coming to their aid, even as of now. But in all this, women still delivered. Women If you look at countries that were said to have done well during the pandemic, Norway and New Zealand, and even some US states, the states that were led by women were said to have done better than other states that were led by men, because naturally women are protective. So whatever we would do to protect the family, and then when you project it to protect the world at large, women will always do that. And in the fight against the pandemic, either economically, politically, socially, wherever you looked at it, women were there and women represented well. A study I saw by the Harvard Business Review, published in the Harvard Business Review, looked at what happened during the pandemic era. They looked at 60,000 businesses and leaders who were led by men and women. And then it was seen that in almost every category that they looked at, women were seen as better leaders than men. So why are we not taking advantage of this natural thing that God has given to women, to give women that limelight to lead the country in a better direction? But then we always try to shut women, not include them when it's always like a second thought when we are doing things. People will have to come and talk like this before the minister or somebody will remember that, okay, women have to be represented, and then they call women to come in. It shouldn't be like that at all. So let's look at healthcare workers. For women in the healthcare, we were able to take up the whole thing about the pandemic very well. We have an association, Medical Women's Association of Ghana. We're able to increase awareness on this pandemic by providing, creating flyers that were shared by members across various social media handles, educating the public on hand washing, wearing of face masks, and then social distancing. If you look around, you ask whether there were any other such initiatives coming across from our male counterparts. We didn't leave it there. We also solicited for funds, created 3-ply face masks that were distributed across the country from Accra to Boku. From the east to the west, every part of the country was reached by Medical Women's Association of Ghana. These 3-ply masks were sewn and they were accredited by the Food and Drugs Authority, and then they were distributed across the nation, all in the, we're trying to help the whole country prevent more people from contracting this deadly virus as it was. MWAG did not stop there. PPEs were solicited. We solicited for funds, got PPEs, and distributed it the same way across the country to all major regions where MWAG members were, so that they could be protected against contracting this virus. If you zoom into the TTH response, it was difficult trying to get PPEs at a point. So with the women's leadership, we're able to get manufacture our own face shields, for the Department of Obstetrics and Gynecology. And this went a long way to give the staff a better morale hanging around patients who were suspected to have the COVID virus, because at that time, it was really difficult even purchasing these things from the market. And as I put it, women were in all spheres of the leadership against the COVID. The only surgical team that was in the Tamale Teaching Hospital was headed by a woman, and successfully they did 6 surgeries amongst patients that were suspected of having COVID-19 or tested positive for COVID-19 virus. The challenges about this COVID-19 and the healthcare sector, so far as women are concerned, abound. The delay in receiving test results, it was really, really difficult, because You will take a test today and you get the result in 2 weeks. Within that period, you don't know how to handle such a patient. By the time the results come, there is inadvertent exposure to staff and to other patients. The inadequate supply of personal protective equipment around the clock was also a major block when it came to the pandemic. The issue about the incentives and the promises that were too slow to come to limelight is just about 2 weeks ago that they paid the 50% that was promised to healthcare workers. The month of July and August 2020 was paid 2 weeks ago. I mean, this really does not go down well at all. If you make a promise as a government, you should be able to deliver. So every day, the president will come out and say, oh, we have extended the incentives to December. We are still now receiving that of August. We're hoping that the December promise will keep going, because the more you break such promises, the more you break the morale of workers. And as I said, the insurance package, we are yet to see that come to limelight. So many people have fallen sick from this virus and had to pay out of the pockets to do very costly investigations, buy costly medications. Some of them are still not even back at work, and there is no insurance as at now that we speak. If you come to the issue of vaccines, the same thing happened. When the vaccines came to the country, it was as if it was just Accra and Kumasi that was Ghana. But you had people, you had said they should stand in the front line for you. So I expected personally that when the vaccine came, at least every frontline worker everywhere would have been attended to before other social people will be giving the vaccine. But they had to take threats from people. Like in my facility, we had to write. At a point, people wrote that they would not take care of COVID positive cases any longer because they were not being given their 50% and vaccine was nowhere to be found. It was just after that that the minister now made a promise to get the vaccine across the country. We should think a little bit beyond just the major cities of the country. But hope is not lost. There's still hope. Now that the vaccine is available with equitable and timely distribution, everybody will get vaccinated. The more severe cases will be reduced, and then the workload on healthcare workers will also come down. We should also look at getting more PPEs and gear more towards local production, because it was not until we had this pandemic that people could not import from China and other places that we realized that our local companies could make us hand sanitizers. But we were always depending on these things imported from other countries. We should look inwardly and then encourage ourselves to build long-term capacities. Incentives should not always be monetary. I mean, we can have motivational packages that go beyond just the money. It can be promotions, it can be scholarships, it can be study leaves, and so on. These little things can motivate your healthcare workers to put out some much more, because we cannot say that COVID-19 is going to be the last. Maybe something else is coming, and the way you treat your healthcare workers today will determine what will happen the next time you need them. And the insurance package, I hope people are on this call that can hear and reach to the minister. They should let the insurance package flow, because people are indeed suffering from this virus, and they caught this in line of duty. You just have to fulfill your promise, Mr. President. So I conclude with what Rosalynn Carter, former First Lady of US, said, that a leader takes people where they want to go, but a great leader takes people where they don't necessarily want to go, but they ought to be. And for me, I believe women are great leaders. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Hawa. Women are great leaders. Thanks for shedding light on the challenges, but also for bringing to bear all of the actions that you have done in your capacity as a leader within the Medical Women Association of Ghana. That takes us to our next speaker, a lady I'm very keen to listen to. And this was a lady I first met in the last quarter of last year during the presidential debate with His Excellency former President John Mahama. And in the aftermath of that professional dialogue, a lawyer, Justice Remsai, had the opportunity to make some comments on Facebook. And I would want to quote what he said about this lady. She was the star of the evening for me as the president of the Greater Accra Markets Association. What an amazing woman. She was very upfront. She recalled the project to modernize markets in the cities. Then she accused the former president of starting the project in Kumasi and in Cape Coast rather than in Accra, because in her view, Accra markets are seriously threatened by the mall system. So without modernized markets, the association will soon be out of business in Accra. As the president of the Market Association, she's led a number of initiatives to protect lives and to protect jobs. So I'm very happy that as a Center for Social Justice, we can also give the platform to distinguished leaders like Madam Mercy Nijan. So Madam, please, over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm Mercy Naafluwa Nijan, President of the Greater Accra Markets Association. And as I'm here, my main aim is how to manage the market association or the markets in Greater Accra. You know, we have about 64 markets in Greater Accra, which is under the association. During the pandemic, we also had a lot of challenges because of our businesses. First, when the pandemic came, you know, we are vulnerable. A lot of us are illiterate. So we started playing with the old thing. We thought it's not possible. Unfortunately, we got to know of the pandemic just late. But as usual, we have to prepare ourselves to face the problem. The first issue was we were told the markets should be closed so that they can spray the markets. And from Friday, Monday, we have to close all markets in Greater Accra for the spraying work. Just imagine those who are selling perishable goods. They have bought their goods already, and all of a sudden they have to close those markets. It wasn't easy. But so far as it is an emergency, we thought it's very, very important that we should give access to the authorities to spray the markets. From that end, we have also to apply shift system. So what we were doing was already the markets are choked. So we have to let some of the members come for 2 days, the other for another 2 days. It came to a time where we have to see to it that those selling perishable goods can come and do their businesses. Those who are in the general goods should stay at home so that the public will get food to eat. Now, when everything is becoming very tight on our head, it came to a time that we have to buy the protocol items. We were given some, but they weren't sufficient. So we have to buy because we have to protect our lives and the lives of the public. So the little money we have, still we have to buy the sanitizers, the soap, all that is the nose mask and everything. So the little money is also going. From that issue, we have this identification, because when there was the lockdown, some of the markets who sell perishable goods were asked to come and sell their goods. But how can you come in? Maybe you are from Kaswa coming to Accra. You have these security checkpoints where you have to show an ID before you are allowed to come to Accra. Unfortunately, we haven't got any ready-made ID. We were trying to make our ID, but it was stopped. So we have to quickly see to it that how can we get IDs for our women so that they can be able to do their businesses. So that one was also involving monies because they have to do it emergency. From that point, now it came to social distancing. And that is where our problem came, because some of the markets, women were moved from their sitting places to school parks. Some of them were sent to other isolated markets. So you go there and you will see that at the end of the day, all your money will be lost. Apart from that, some of us have to sit in the house because our children are in the house. So it became very difficult. At the end of the day, you will see that everything is gone. Now we have to come back to the market after the lockdown. Why some of us are very fearful, we don't feel we should go. Others who are going fear that they will get the disease. So this became very difficult for us, but still we have to manage. Now, we found out that apart from that, now it's very difficult for us and even to get the goods to sell because they have closed all borders. Nobody is going out to import. Those who are going to the various villages to buy the goods also fear. While the market women fear, the villagers also fear. So it became very difficult for us. But during this course, we found out that some things are very, very distinct, understanding that yes, we have some things to do which we have not been doing, especially cleaning of the markets. We found out that cleanliness is very key because if you are able to make your place clean, it means at least you have passed half of this thing hurdle for the disease. So we became alert, say at least we have to make our places clean. We became alert that we have to attend a workshop by NGOs, the assemblies, so that we know exactly what the disease and the whole thing is all about. Now, after doing all these things, we found out that some of the problems are from the public, not the market alone, because they come in to buy. And you see, by a traditional trading or a traditional buying and selling, somebody will come and the person will be weighing the fish, weighing the cassava, weighing the plantain. Immediately you talk, then you will get a problem. So we now have to educate the public that for the sake of the pandemic, we plead with them. They can either use pointed or sticks to show exactly what they want. Now we found out that the market trading itself has got a very unique problem, the problem of counting money. Although we don't know where the money passes through, you see a market woman or a market man counting money, and the person will be using touching the hand with the saliva to count the money. It means that with that, we are sending the disease straight into our mouth. So we have to educate the women on that. And by the grace of God, they now found this thing, the essence of picking up what we have been telling them. So really, we were able to educate them, because all that we need was education. Education, they don't believe the disease is real, they haven't seen, they are always hearing, they feel that the disease is for only elite people, people in high office, but not those of us on the ground, that is the vulnerable. So all that they are doing is, oh, the Koro is for these big people, not for market people. So that education also have to go. Now, the market women were so, I mean, they are so unique in such a way that it came to a time when they found out that no, if we don't take proper measures, things will come to a standstill. So after the education, we found out that now their finances are gone. How can we move on? Fortunately, the president launched the Corona, the virus money. I was invited. We went, we came back. Now we have to fill for this thing, funds. Imagine a market woman who haven't gone to school before, and the sort of form she has to fill online. Even the educated ones among us find it very difficult to answer the questions that are required. So by the time we got experts to come and help us to fill this form, time was overdue. Fortunately, few people of us got their loans. Others, they said the registration there's a mistake. There is a mistake here, there is a mistake there. But I don't blame anybody. A market woman filling form alone, it's really a problem. Now, we found out that some of the banks are coming to us, but when they come, they will say, come and put your money there, and we use that money to give you a loan. If somebody has lost all the money, what can she get to put it at the bank for getting the loan? So it seems as if the women are going backwards, but still we are educating them, and we want the bank people to give them a lot of education, sensitize them, and know the instinct of that putting the money in the bank before the loan. Now, there is this issue of our shortcomings. Those who went to the parks and so on, they lost everything because people don't know there is a market there. People don't go there to buy. The only people that were fortunate to make it were those who were selling the protocol items, because people are ready to participate in their items. We have one problem, and our problem that we are still dealing with is the social distancing. Already the markets are choked, and a woman is the breadwinner of the house. So if you ask a woman to sit in the house for 2 days, for 3 days, it's a problem. So what we are praying is for the authorities to come to our aid so that they renovate the market for us, expand the markets so that there will be space for us to do our businesses. Also, we have found out that still the understanding of the virus is very limited. So we need more education and finances. The pandemic has really done a big blow to the markets, a very big blow. And we hope that things will be well managed so that at least those who haven't got their loans, the president loans, will get their loans. Those who have should manage it properly so that they'll be able to take care of their business and their family. Thank you very much.
So thank you very much, Madam Nijan. We are very grateful for this context-specific discussion on the issue of market women and the effect of the pandemic on activities within the market, but also you sharing with us some of the initiatives that the women adopted to be able to address that, and your subsequent plead. Hopefully CSJ will be able to put together a policy paper and make sure that we reach a wider audience, and hopefully the ears that need to hear will hear, and then we'll implement it. So we'll just take a quick, Soji, are we taking a quick musical interlude, or we should just move on?
I suggest we move on.
Perfect. I think the discussion is becoming interesting, and people are holding on to hear more. So our next speaker is Madame Kathleen Addy. She's a deputy chairperson for the National Commission for Civic Education, and she is in charge specifically of finance and administration. I recall that once the virus arrived in Ghana, a lot of us were asking questions about which agency is actually supposed to be educating Ghanaians on some of these issues. And all of a sudden, most of us recall that there's an agency like the NCCE. Some of us added our voice to the call to equip for equipment for the NCCE to be able to do their work. And we do hope that Kathleen would be able to share some of the activities that NCCE embarked upon, and particularly looking at it from the perspective of women. And Kathleen here is a gender activist. For those of you who probably know her on social media, her social media handle personally actually is focused on women issues. So she is right, she's in the right place. Proud to becoming the deputy national chairperson for the NCCE in 2017. Ms. Addy worked with the Center for Democratic Development, where she was on the Afrobarometer, and she was a communication manager with oversight over 7 African countries. She also worked with the Center for Policy Analysis, SEPA Ghana, as a research and communications officer. She has a lot of training under her belt, and then she took up a master's degree in communications from the University of Ghana School of Communication Studies. So Ms. Kathleen Addy, we're ready to hear from you, and thank you very much for accepting our invitation to participate this evening.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and I'm really, really grateful to be here. I want to start by apologizing for coming on screen late. I was trying to get my internet to work, but you know how these things go. The day you need it most is the day it will disappoint you. So I logged in, much later than I intended to, and I really sincerely apologize for that. So if I'm forgiven, then I can go on with my with my presentation. And I feel really excited about the things that I've heard so far, because I think that these are the stories, these are the perspectives, these are the important issues that sometimes we have missed over the last couple of months as we have struggled as individuals and as a country to overcome this pandemic that took the whole world by surprise early last year. I must say, and I always say this when I get the opportunity, because as a country we must do better, we must respond better, and we must hear the voices that we normally do not hear. Because last year, February, I wrote the first proposal for public education. This was February, and sent it to many different offices in high places about this particular pandemic, because I could tell that this was going to be a terrible thing. At NCC, looking at the analysis that we're doing at the time, we realized that we needed to be ahead of the curve, particularly in terms of education, because so much about this thing was unknown. But as it happened, we didn't get a response till pandemic hit the country, till there was a public outcry, till the fear and panic set in, till there was a whole campaign for us to get resources to be able to do the public education, which we then did once we got the resources. We got the money we asked for. We were loaned pickups to be able to do our work, because you see, NCC, and I'm glad Amanda said suddenly everybody remembered there's an institution like that. It's an institution that has been systematically under-resourced right from the beginning of the Fourth Republic. A lot of the vehicles that directors in the districts in hard-to-reach places, if you go there, you realize that these are vehicles from maybe 2007 or 2005 or something like that. The last set of vehicles came just a small number, around 2012. But these are really small numbers and did not, did not last for so long. So the fleet was totally defleeted. Yeah. So, but you see, the thing about NCC is that the good chunk of our work, is in the districts. We have an office in every single district, and that is where majority of the work happens, because our officers are embedded in communities. Our officers speak the language of the communities where they are, and they need to be able to reach, difficult to reach places. So, in fact, it was a very it was great for us that we got the vehicles. I mean, after a while, some of it was taken back, but we got to keep 25 pickups out of the 50 that we were loaned from government, because they have been purchased for another institution and not for us. But it brought to light, the fact that we need to resource institutions and not wait for a pandemic. Because if every government over the years had contributed significantly to the fleet, at the time of a pandemic, we will now be scrambling around looking for vehicles to borrow. But anyway, it did come through. And then as a result of that, and the attention that came to under-resourcing, we also were able to purchase vehicles from the COVID Trust Fund, as well as the mid-year budget review. We're able to also, get the budget to be able to purchase even more vehicles. So our fleet is doing much better, but it's still not adequate at all, but we are doing much better than we were at this time last year. Now, in terms of this presentation, I'd like to talk about a range of things and not necessarily focus on the women of the NCC or the leadership of the NCC, which is women, by the way. The chairman of the NCC is Josephine Nkrumah, a woman. I'm deputy chairman, charge of finance and administration, a woman. My co-deputy chairman, Mr. Samuel Kwama, is a man, but he's a very gender-sensitive man. And we work as a team together to do everything that we are supposed to do, given the resources that we have. I said I like the previous presentations because a lot of things that I wrote down to speak about, is reinforced by the previous speakers. So for instance, if you look at this country, majority of people in the country are women, about 51%. We also know that women form a great chunk of heads of households in this country. I think nearly half and growing. Informally, the households, and this is formally and on record, that so many women, are heads of households. But we all know that the truth of the matter is that majority of households are actually run by women. Women in Ghana run not just a double shift, but triple, quadruple shift. They earn, they birth, they serve, they domestic, they force, they fight. Women do so many things. And so you find out that in many households, women are actually the head or a very or great contributors to the income of the household. But if you look at the structure of the pandemic and who it struck, you will realize that women have indeed borne the brunt of everything. as one of the previous speakers mentioned, majority of health workers are women, especially those who bear the brunt of physical caring for the sick. You know, the nurses and allied health workers, plus doctors as well. You find a lot of women in those ranks. If you look at teachers, 7 out of every 10 teachers are actually women. So this, you know, that health and education were the focal points of attack in defense when it came to the pandemic, because it's around health and education that people congregate, that diseases spread, and particularly around health that solutions are deployed. If you come to small businesses, again, about 70% of small businesses in Ghana owned by women, and particularly the businesses that are service-oriented, that provide direct services to other people, majority of it owned by women. So we have things like the grooming industry, which is hairdressing, barbering, and all of that. We have catering services and all of that. And so women, you know, were doing so well in these spaces. So the pandemic struck. So once the pandemic struck, and you know, we had to change the way we lived, and we had to change the way we worked, so many businesses had to shut down. So many businesses, and a lot of them are small businesses that, you know, are running on a shoestring budget, and so could not take, and a lot of them that shut down could not even be revived because they shut down and they were just gone. There was no money to, you know, recapitalize businesses. And so many of the people who have suffered unemployment from the pandemic are women. So forget about the layoffs, not forget about, but in addition to the layoffs from the formal sector where loss of jobs, you know, affected men and women, in the informal sector, we had more women, you know, suffering from lack of income because the jobs had dried up, because businesses had to be shut down, because patronage was low, because everybody was hiding and everybody was saving their money for essentials, food, COVID protocol items and all of that. So it changed the economic dynamic of the business environment so drastically. So, and even as we speak, and as our mother from the market has indicated, few have been able to, you know, recover fully. And many women are completely out of business, you know, as we speak. And this is a problem because the pandemic has also exposed structural deficiencies as a country and as a society. We realized, it suddenly became very obvious, all the limitations of our healthcare system, the limitations of our education system. Somebody has even spoken about the way deaths are arranged and all of that. The limitations that we have in the boarding schools, the risk that our children face just by being, in that space, all came to light. Our social systems, the way markets are structured. I mean, I saw a picture from a very long time ago, maybe about 100 years ago, that depicted a market in Ghana. And really, truly, in terms of the way it looked, it has not changed at all. The layout is the same. You will not think that it has. As a people, we have had 100 years since that picture was taken of development of technology in architecture, in spatial arrangements, and all of those things. The market layout is exactly the same. What has happened that because of congestion, it has become even more dangerous, you know, in terms of diseases spreading and all of that. So suddenly it became clear that as a people, we hadn't invested enough in some of these things. The way that we have allowed the peri-urban communities to spring up around the cities, the congestion, the exposure to disease, the unhealthy environment because of filth, because of lack of drainages and all of that, it suddenly became clear that we have been actually sitting on a time bomb because all of these things have been neglected. But really, truly, it was the women that carried the day, and it's the women that have brought us this far as far as the pandemic is concerned, because they've had to carry all the load, the double shifts in the domestic sphere. Once the kids came home, became a big problem. Then, because at home, first, people were, during lockdown, people were, were at home. It's a big problem, the tension that led to the domestic violence and all of that. Then once the workspace opened up, people had to leave, but the kids were still at home. It became a big problem for a lot of people who, had structured their lives in such a way that they were at work when the kids were away, and then when they were home, the kids were home, and then they could, care for them. It also became clear that we don't have proper support structures in terms of welfare, after school services. All these things we have not taken into consideration as a country because we're living free. I hope that the pandemic has taught us a lesson and that we will do much better in terms of some of these soft areas that are not very concrete, that we can, that can be easily overlooked. So women are in this domestic sphere, going through these hard times. Majority of them too are the health workers, are the teachers, are the small business owners, meaning that financially the struggle is very real because when the children are at home, you spend so much more on food, so much more on trying to keep them entertained, so much more on trying to set up a laptop and buy data for those who could even afford that, for those that was even a possibility. And truth is that it wasn't a possibility for majority of the people, but for those that was even a possibility to give a child a laptop and set up classes with data, the financial burden was really huge. Then the extra burden of purchasing masks and sanitizers, women really have been through a really rough time with the pandemic and have come through spectacularly for the country. So back to the NCCE story. Once we got the support that we needed, we rolled out a very intensive campaign. We were active in all the places that people gather in this country to work or to play. We were particularly active in markets, lorry parks, and places like that, encouraging people to do the right thing, to social distance, which was very difficult because of the way the markets are laid out, as has been pointed out. And I'm a witness to that because I went to several markets across the country, and where the people had been moved to places that were not originally markets, getting customers to come there was so terrible. There was so difficult because already everybody was afraid. Everybody was living in fear, and when you're living in fear, you tend to go around the things that are familiar, be closer to the things that are familiar. So people will go to the markets where they are familiar with. To tell somebody to move somewhere else because of this or that, the person is already in panic mode, so difficult. So a lot of the women in the market suffered, and as an NCCE worker, I can testify to that because I was a witness to some of it. And it was so difficult trying to balance for them, it was difficult trying to balance the pros and cons between a disease that you couldn't see, initially, you couldn't even conceptualize in your daily bread. Because there are a lot of people in this country who have to sell every single day in order to make a living. If they go 2 days without sales, they are basically about to starve, So this was very difficult. I remember going to a market in Takoradi and being completely at a loss. Or was it Cape Coast? I've even forgotten. Completely at a loss because, I mean, how are you telling people to social distance when you can see very well that there's no space to social distance? They are all, tightly packed in these small spaces. So what are you telling them? How are you explaining the social distancing for them? So it has been quite a challenge. And for me, it was a challenge, but for my staff in the field, it was even greater because they had to access, difficult places that, no matter how far I try to cover, I may not be able to go. They had a resource crunch, did not have adequate resources, had to make a lot of sacrifices to get the education out to the people. The thing that was good for us this time around was that we're able to use our social media pages to do a lot of public education. If you visit our pages and you track the work that we've done over the months, it was almost a year now. We did a lot of work using social media, knowing that a lot of people, especially places where there's heavy congestion, a lot of people are on social media, on Facebook, on WhatsApp. We really pushed hard to put a lot of our education in that direction, and it paid off because people heard the messages, both on radio, social media, and all on the Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and all of that. I'm sure, I don't know how many of you saw a famous Jerusalem video, but that was a political video. But by that time, we're reaping the benefits of all the work that we had done with how do you call it, over the pandemic period, and people were visiting. So once we did a video, that we had people dancing about another message, it really went far. But it was because we had built on what we had already done during for the pandemic education. We did a lot of street campaigns, where we stood by the roadside with the placards. All of us went out as human billboards, stood at the junctions, in the intersections throughout the city, reminding people to wear masks, to sanitize, and to social distance. Because actually, with this COVID pandemic, those are the three things. If you get those three things right, you could actually eliminate the pandemic without spending a whole lot of money as we're having to. If we all wear a mask, if we all sanitize, and if we all social distance, we'll be able to get rid of this thing. But these are behavioral changes that are very difficult to effect, I mean, even for a lot of people, even for medical staff who, have, the education, understand the concepts and immediately get it, very difficult to now have to, even wear a mask 24 hours and plus, because a lot of medical people were working overtime, so it's been a real roller coaster and a big learning opportunity for us at NCC in the way that we have seen the impact of our education from March to the end of the year. And then at the end of the year, what happened was that, as if you remember, in late December and January, our numbers started picking up again. And everybody was saying that, but why has the education stopped? But sometimes I'll ask, but if you've been educated, especially if you understand, you have to keep spending money, saying the same thing over again. But that's the nature of the work and behavior change. If you want to be effective in that space, you have to keep repeating yourself. So once our campaign sort of dialed down a bit, and people became very, very complacent, and people were having the big events and all of that, the next thing we knew, our numbers were going up again. Now I think we are in decline again, but through a really rough time with this pandemic, and women have come through, but as a society, we have been able to, our weaknesses have been exposed. Like I mentioned before, all the things that we need to do to build ourselves up for the next pandemic that will hit, because we keep hearing that this is just, one of a few or many to come. How do we prepare? How are we prepared for the next one that will hit? And now we are even in the era of educating people about vaccines. And it's also another big thing that we are having to deal with as a commission. The vaccine skepticism is so high, and it's sometimes you wonder, it's really amazing that after all that we've been through last year with the fear and the panic and all of that, and as a result of science and development and progress, we've come up with these vaccines. No, we have, the world has come up with these vaccines. If you see the level of skepticism out there, if you see the way people are consuming fake news and conspiracy theories and all of that, it really surprises me. But it is what it is. That's the reality that we have to deal with now. Educating people and convincing people to take the vaccine and encourage those around them to do the same. What really breaks my heart is the number of health workers, especially, who are vaccine skeptics. I can't understand. There are high-level health professionals. I hope you can help me with that one. To be able to structure my public education for health workers, because I don't know what to say to you. You know everything already. Anyway, So that's basically it. As a commission, we've learned a lot from this pandemic. Like I said, the women's angle is inherent in the work that we do. We make special arrangements for women's groups, for vulnerable groups. We make special arrangements for the disabled, and this became extremely critical because, you know, when you do your normal education, you assume that everybody can see your messages, everybody can hear, everybody can walk to a place where they will get services, but it's actually not that way at all, because there's a whole community of disabled people amongst us, and we went out of our way to ensure that the messages got to them. We targeted them specifically, and messages got to them to ensure that they were also able to do what they could do to protect their lives. So we've done our bit as a commission, but I think that, I mean, the people who need to be celebrated are, and who are the real leaders, are not people like me sitting at the head of a commission, but people struggling with everyday survival issues, heads of households, owners of businesses, health workers, teachers, all these people leading people who don't know much at all, you know, in their own small way, leading households, leading classrooms, leading the sick. These are the people that we should be celebrating. And I'm so happy about the structure of this panel that brings the voices of everybody on board, because, I mean, without that, without women who were pragmatic, and I have to mention, and as the previous speaker mentioned, the fact that it became very obvious amongst world leaders, that is the women world leaders who were most successful in getting their numbers, their COVID infection numbers down. And I think that is simply because women are pragmatic, because they have to deal with difficulties on a daily basis. They do it without complaining, so everybody assumes that it's just a normal part of life. Running a household is no joke. But you will find few women who will get up and say, oh, I'm running a household, it's such a big deal. We all take it for granted, you know, but it's a full-time, it's a very, very difficult task, juggling, and then you add that to trying to have a career, trying to earn a living, trying to support a partner, trying to, you know, make sure that the kids are on the right path when you have to go to work and come every day. But women rock, really, because they are able to handle all of these things, and that is what came through, you know, with the world leaders who were so spectacular over the last couple of months. So for me, the focus of this discussion, and in terms of identifying the gaps and what we do, what we need to do, the structure of the panel is fantastic, because we have people who have the real life experience, who can give real information to some of us who may be operating close to policy spaces, so that we are able to incorporate all of their observations, comments into the work that we do. So I would end with this saying that you are never too small to make a difference. And normally women are seen generally as the small people, or the people who are, you know, but really truly, what this pandemic demonstrates that nobody is too small to make a difference. Women are definitely not too small to make a difference, because if you look at the trajectory of the pandemic, it is the women of Ghana, it is the women of the world that have brought us to a point where we are almost in you know, getting a grip of the situation. And this saying, well, this was said by Greta Thunberg, who is a climate activist. I don't know if you know her, very young lady, very, very articulate and very, very smart, and has been able to take on world leaders in a way that is just amazing to watch. So on that note, I want to thank C, Center of Social Justice, and all panelists and everybody else on this call for listening to me go on and on. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kathleen Addy. Clearly working in a resource-constrained environment, but leveraging technology to amazing effect. Indeed, women rock. At the Center for Social Justice, we currently have a public education campaign ongoing to address some of the vaccine hesitancy issues. And we will be open to partnering with you if you are so inclined, and to be able to address some of the issues that you've clearly outlined. So that's brilliant. So we have our final speaker for today, and we are privileged to have a lady who I would say has fired the imagination of the country by her passion, by her intelligence, by her sheer charisma. A corporate lawyer, she has advised extensively on the adoption of international maritime transport instruments, regulations, and conventions. At one point, serving as an expert for the Ghanaian Admiralty Court. She's a member of the Ghana Bar Association, the African Women Lawyers Association, and the Women in International Shipping and Trade Association, and an alumnus of the US International Vista Leadership Program. She holds a Master of Arts degree in International Peace and Security from the Kofi Annan International Peacekeeping Institute, a Master of Laws degree in International Maritime Transport Law from their institute in Malta, a qualifying certificate in law from the Ghana Law School, an LLB law degree from the University of London in Holborn College. She served as a Deputy Minister for Transport from May 2013 to January 2017, overseeing aviation, maritime and inland waterways, railways, and road transport services. She's currently also, in addition to everything else, a special aide to His Excellency John Dramani Mahama, former President of the Republic of Ghana. So we are very honored to have the Honorable Joyce Bawa Mukhtari to give us the closing address. So Honorable, over to you.
A very good evening to you, Soji. Good evening to Amanda and everybody else. An absolute privilege to be here with you this evening. Somehow, I think that just about everything I could have thought of has actually been said. I think we've lived the experience with Auntie Mercy. We've listened to the medical doctor who was actually a frontline health worker. We've also listened to our madam here, Kathleen from the NCCE. And yes, Kathleen Joseph is actually my senior, and I used to work with her in the law firm, a fantastic leader, certainly a woman who has civic education right on her doorsteps. And I think that you two have done a fantastic job. Judging even by the panel here, I've seen how Amanda has been so supportive, and Bash with all her fights and activist roles that she's been playing so far. There is really no gainsaying that our response to COVID, our response to the pandemic has actually shown very vitally the relevance of women in leadership, how women have responded, how women have been proactive. And indeed, it was such a beautiful sight when we all watched as Madame Angela Merkel left office, and that loud applause she received as being one of the females who was actually celebrated, not just for her leadership qualities, but also for how she has led Germany through this pandemic. Indeed, women continue to achieve many laurels, and I have no doubt in my mind that Ghana will certainly recognize the contribution of all of her women to this fight, first pre-COVID, post-COVID, and certainly for the future. I believe the United Nations has taught us one thing, that we should start to prepare in a balanced for better manner, so that we do not wait till another pandemic hits. At least we should envisage the possibility of a pandemic as we go along. I think there's a very good reason why females or women generally have managed their responses and reactions a lot better than our male counterparts. I have observed that in most of the female-led exercises towards finding a solution and protecting citizens globally, because it was not just in Ghana or in Africa. This was a global challenge that each and every one faced, even in the very advanced countries. Their health services were brought down to their knees. Nothing seemed to work. Everybody was caught pants down, and it found it very difficult for all of us to recover and actually even find a way to resort to ways in which we could at least serve our people even better. I have no doubt in my mind that women really have led this fight effectively, that women have been at the forefront, not just as health workers, because yes,
majority of the people in the care environment, health facilities, most of the support staff are the nurses, the midwives. They have faced these challenges at work day and night. They have come home to face similar challenges. Our market women, Auntie Mercy, has actually done a yeoman's job. She took up this opportunity to actually advocate for and educate women in her catchment area, specifically her large constituency of market women. These stories that she's told us are the same stories across West Africa, across Africa. You would hear stories about markets in Lagos. They are almost a replica of what transcends here in Ghana. So there are similar stories across the length and breadth of the world. Why we need to continue to encourage, and I would love to use your platform in particular to advocate for attention to be paid to the affirmative action bill. I think it all starts with that particular action, and it's something that we need, and I believe that platforms like yours can actually advocate and put pressure on our members of parliament. If you intend to have a way in which you influence policy, in our part of the world, because we are a democracy, you start largely from the executive, you would move on to the legislature, you move on to the judiciary, and then certainly the fourth estate of the realm, that is the media, because they will then propagate your message, they will bring pressure to bear. I have no doubt to my mind that women will continue to be recognized for their contributions throughout our social, economic, and cultural activities. But more than ever, I think handling of this pandemic, the challenges we have faced, yes, like every other challenge since World War II, which we've all read about historically, women have suffered even more. Indeed, our responses have largely not been gendered. It is not because we have not made an effort to influence the responses geared towards not just our marginalized, but of course our vulnerable as well. Remember also that 52% of our population that constitutes women are largely also found in this category of the vulnerable, largely, and marginalized. Indeed, each of the stimulus packages, most of the responses, even in some cases, the legislations that were passed in terms of lockdowns, in terms of curfews, in terms of packages for persons, even for food supplies to persons who needed it, there really was no categorical effort to focus largely on women and persons with vulnerabilities or disabilities or the marginalized per se. Indeed, in our part of the world, what has happened is that health facilities in some parts of our 16 regions are even probably better than in most other parts of the country. So you find that even in terms of our distribution for health facilities, social amenities such as housing, water, name it, persons within certain catchment areas of our country suffer more than the rest. In terms of transportation, which has always been a matter that has always been at the forefront of most of these challenges, even how to move from one place to the other. And I'm sure you remember, at the inception of this pandemic, all people wanted to do was to leave and go back to their homes of origin. Nobody made an effort to protect them, to provide additional routes, to provide additional transportation. Indeed, we were literally caught pants down because this was a global situation that nobody had envisaged. Indeed, even when it started, it took a while before it actually settled on people's minds that this was something the world had never grappled with. Beyond the lexicon, beyond the nomenclature, having to adhere to World Health Organization protocols, we know just what we're suffering. Basic amenities. Government did its very best fundamentally to assist in terms of providing water, to assist in terms of providing additional hospital facilities. And in fact, a whole new facility was constructed to cater to persons who needed health facilities and attention. I also recall that in every effort, even at testing, we caught on very late. We had one testing center based here in Accra. It took enormous advocacy and pressure to even have other people come on board and provide similar testing services to everybody. At some point, even we were not too certain about the data that we were generating because most places really had no testing facilities. So yes, even in very, very advanced environments, they were challenged. So certainly a poor African country with many social challenges, our issues were bound to be more difficult than other people. But I believe that all in all, somehow through God's own mercy, through whatever interventions were available, I would have wished that there could have been a more bipartisan approach to handling matters to do with this pandemic. I would have hoped that many other civil society organizations would have been consulted and brought to bear in terms of education, in terms of support facilities and whatnot. I would also have hoped that we had focused even more on research, because you see, without data to drive interventions, somehow you are grappling in the dark. So certainly responses were one, not gendered. Two, we didn't even know what numbers we're dealing with, but at least we all know that majority of the persons who were bound to suffer more than any other person were bound to be women and of course children. Even in cases where people were infected, most often than not, they did not even know that they were infected. So they continue to go about their business. Auntie Mercy just explained how difficult it would have been for us to have stayed in this lockdown for beyond what happened. Even in the short period, we saw how difficult it was because we did not have basic amenities to ensure that people could stay within a household environment for a certain period of time. The UN posits that every hour of a day, 137 women are assaulted, they are battered, or somehow there's some violence, and it's usually closest with people who are close to them, for example, in the family environment. I was very, very impressed when the UK in particular led a very, very interesting intervention, actually putting out about £2 million sterling to take care of domestic violence situations. They set up hotlines and all of that. It was then that I started to ask myself why there was a need to commit so much money to rising cases of domestic violence. And then I started to ask questions here in Ghana and realized that it was pretty much the same. People had no money to go out and test. So even if you were infected, what were you supposed to do? You'd bring it home anyway. If you went to the market, you'd bring it home. We didn't have adequate protective equipment for most of our healthcare workers who were also women and mothers. And I love the fact that the doctor is actually someone who worked in that environment and brought it all to bear to each one of us. You didn't need to go around and find that this was what was happening. So yes, even in that small corner, they made every effort to improve upon protection, to improve upon education, to at least find ways to augment whatever services government was willing to provide. But yes, there have also been challenges. For example, with stimulus packages, like Madam just said, who actually helps to fill out the forms? Who provides the location addresses? Who is there to go into these markets and even make life a little bit easier for them? Indeed, when it came even to masks, I recall that most communities, people had no masks. Members of parliament and other social or civil society organizations and churches actually had to try to manufacture masks locally so that people would at least have a mask to use. But of course, the education was also inadequate. And there was also some rumor that this was actually almost like a city dwellers infection and that did not affect other people. So you notice that the communication was not so good. The advocacy, everybody made an effort, but remember, beyond radio, most of our other areas do not have data. They're very, not very good television services. And I remember one of our microbiologists telling me that we could even have information service vans traverse the length and breadth of the country. Yes, at some point this was done. I believe that every effort was made to at least improve upon response. Look at the patient to doctor or health care ratios. Even those ones will tell you that despite the very best efforts of the powers that be, it was always going to be a very, very daunting task. Going forward, I realized that sadly, We did not focus on providing first access to justice for those who needed it. There are people who needed protection from perpetrators of violence of any kind, and especially of the domestic kind. I'm particularly happy that in the aftermath, the gender ministry has taken this responsibility very seriously. Hopefully things will improve. We have also picked up stories about increased reports about violence in homes that have actually led, unfortunately, to deaths in some cases. It is also as a result of this COVID conversations that these reports are coming up, because people are now happy to report it. People are paying closer attention. Maybe even health facilities are taking notice, unlike before. Who actually bothered about the other patients who did not have COVID, but required medical services? For those who needed, especially for women, reproductive health issues, people who were in labor, people who had babies, the hospitals were clearly inundated. We had a hotline that most often than not kept ringing for days on end, because they simply had run out of beds to cater to the needs of COVID-19 patients. So certainly women in all of these categories were bound to suffer. Take, for example, even safety, moving from one place to the other. Take, for example, protecting oneself from infections from other people. Look at children who were at home. So imagine that a parent, for example, was a healthcare worker. How were they ensuring that they did not bring these infections home? And I'm telling you, I heard a very personal story about a hospital where a couple who had COVID, they assumed that they had recovered, but suddenly fell very ill again. They both walked into the hospital and literally everybody fled. Reason being that one, they were ill prepared, they were not well protected. You cannot possibly even blame them, because their lives matter too. So these are some of the things that women also suffered from. Take, for example, the free water that we had. Water will be free if you have a tap running in your home. But for most of our other dwellers who do not have the privilege of taps in their homes or workplaces, you still have to go out there and fetch water. Who does all of the fetching? Certainly the females within that environment. You know, these are things that social, cultural nuances that we cannot do away with. But I have a certain feeling that we should start now to prepare for better responses in the future. We can no longer hold back on investing in health. We can no longer hold back on investing in testing facilities. We need to open up additional facilities such as Noguchi. It is great news that there's one coming up in the Ashanti region, but certainly we have 16 regions now. At least we should have half of our regions having fully well-equipped, well-facilitated health institutions to deal with any type of pandemic, irrespective of whether it is one on this scale or something else. It is also important that individuals, civil society organizations, anybody who cares, health workers, must now start to bring up proposals to influence policy making. It is why I have no doubt that if we start to encourage more women, I listened, for example, to a member of parliament last night who spoke about the fact that he was from a rural constituency, and he was actually very surprised that members of parliament and their families had to have these vaccines even before other people. The question he was then asking was, so who was actually looking out for the members in rural communities? I have spoken to people in, for example, in parts of the Upper East region. They do not even know that the vaccines are here. So yes, we may need to cure vaccine hesitancy, Soji, but we also do know that in some cases even, one, there are no testing facilities, so people don't even know whether they have it. Secondly, there's no vaccine going around anybody. And thirdly, there is really no targeted form of doing this. Nobody is telling you that this institution is handling women and children or women in some particular category. There's nothing like that. It is almost as if one size fits all. But you and I both know that women are in lower income brackets, that for staying at home and working for fewer hours, we have earned less, that for leaving our kids at home, we've had to invest more in data And in some cases where the extended family system is not as effective, you've also had to invest also in care for your children at home whilst you're at work. These are all matters that should engage us. These are conversations that can only be supported and a future plan put in place if we have research, if we've done adequate processing of this information, where we have investigated also the data that's available for us. Women will continue to be at the forefront of any pandemic now and future. Most of the nurses we have also happen to be women. Majority of teachers happen to be women. If we have insurance, for example, where the insurance processes or procedures are not backed by legislation, government will introduce insurance for health workers. But like the doctor said, it will be months in coming. In fact, when you really need that protection, you might not even be able to access it. So why don't we start to institute these insurance policies to cover emergencies so that you start paying for the policy now? And by the time it approaches maturity, in the unlikely event that we have a situation such as this on our hands, you have ways of training medical doctors, nurses, and other health workers. It is particularly insightful that we don't always have to focus on incentives, which are usually monetary and of course, short-lived. I think she has a great point that it's better to invest in training, to invest in accommodation, to invest in improved facilities in and around the hospitals, even improve on shelters, and of course, facilities for people's young children, so at least they are at peace while they're at work under these circumstances. I know also that a lot of the laws that were passed at the time were largely to deal with these emergencies. As we go along in the post-COVID era, many people will have to recover. There have been so many fallouts from how the stimulus packages are currently being shared or distributed. Indeed, the tourism facilities, the creative industry, the market facilities, many people in the non-formal working environment are struggling now just to make ends meet. In a country with very little or no, extensive public, housing facilities, how do people afford rent? How do families keep a roof over their heads? These are basic, fundamental things that every human being requires. Many boilerplate measures were put in place. I believe that government, civil society organizations, many of the international and diplomatic partners in the country, and of course, even opposition parties tried very hard to make life much easier and more tolerable. But we also know that despite every effort that has been put in, there have been serious challenges that people still have to contend and grapple with. Infection rates. In fact, since the vaccine came, I noticed that there's been a certain shifting of the conversation. I'm not sure that we have actually even reached that over 2 million people within the population, so that we can start to even consider a possibility that herd immunity has worked. But yes, we can continue to start to influence government policies now going forward. I believe it's fantastic that in the 8th Parliament, we now have at least 20 women on each side of the political divide. I would love to hope that in the next 4-year cycle, considering the wind of change that COVID and other things have actually brought to the fore, we now know what women leaders are capable of doing fundamentally. Women naturally are used to juggling. Women are natural planners. Women are natural marketers. Women are natural, even at nurturing other people. It is a certain skill that may be one of the great things about a woman is that we have a way of feeling, a certain empathy. So it helps when it comes to managing social discord, social challenges, and economic issues that require a certain level of attention, more critical than what we have. I have no doubt that there are a lot of these female-owned CSOs that are around in the system doing a fantastic job so far. Eventually, we'll have a database knowing specifically how many women are in these lower income brackets, how many children are in these families of these women, whether they are single-owned or even where they are both parents being available. We need to know all of these things. This is the only way that we can plan, even for deployment of the vaccine. If you don't know what numbers you're dealing with, how do you know how many people are within the market areas who all need a vaccine? How many people are in an environment where you cannot even capture them in any database, but there are people who exist and would need a vaccine as well. Whether the vaccine is free or not, some people do not even have access to it at all. Where there is domestic violence, we need to have courts that have time to ensure that protection is given to people who need it under some emergency circumstances. We need to find resources to fund counseling and psychological analysis, because these are all things that affect people generally in different ways. And these are all matters that I believe that most people have not even had time to deal with. I also believe that these are the reasons why female leaders across the world have done a fantastic job, largely because they have been able to manage it effectively, using probably themselves as an example. So Ghana, I think, has done quite well. There are many case studies that I came across, because we have young children who have been out of school now forever, teenagers. Remember that in some cases, these girls will not go back to school. In some cases, they're even pregnant. In some cases, there's a lot of truancy that are certain. In some cases, even the kids have lost the moral compass and no longer interested in going to school. These are matters that fall within the social protection ambit of any political sphere or society. And these are matters that society needs to pay keener attention to. Otherwise, by the time we are through with this particular pandemic, a lot of our young females in particular will be off the educational stream. I have also read many articles, for example, written by other women, for example, about how this pandemic is actually eroding the gains we've made in terms of equality between men and women. Ghana was actually celebrating parity between the boy and the girl child. Over the next few years, we'll probably find that most of the dropouts from that system will certainly be the girl child and not the boy child. Even where parents have to decide on who gets funding to go to school, most often than not in some communities, the decision will be for the boy child rather than the girl child. So there are a lot of other things that all of these things would come up. How we deal with them, how we handle them will depend on what policies, what rules, what regulations, what laws are put in place. But certainly, it is only when you have female leaders at the policy-making level that you'll be able to have decisions that are made that directly impact women, impact the female, or at least have a certain gendered outlook, because then it will be in their interest. I'm sure, for example, Kathleen, when she's going around with her NCC responsibilities, I'm sure there's more concern when she notices that there are women involved, when there are children involved. The same with Auntie Mercy on her rounds, and Amanda and all these feminists. They spend more time focusing on the things that matter to women. But these are smaller numbers. And she's spoken about how difficult it is to travel the length and breadth of the country, where in some cases even access to people who need it most is very, very difficult and challenging, even for the person who is willing so to do. So we, as a country, and I think Africa as a whole, has problems that are totally different. There's a matter to do with births and deaths and registration of sin. It is only in South Africa that they have a good example where in the period of COVID, pre and post, they have been able at least to keep up to at least 70% of registering deaths in this period. We know what the challenges have been here in Ghana in particular regarding even registration of deaths, even under normal circumstances. In a pandemic of this kind, how often, and I listened to all these conversations about the mass burials, about the challenges to do with admissions, nobody actually wondered whether they were making time to register these deaths, because these are the sort of papers that will guide any future management of matters of this kind. So yes, we all know about all the problems. I believe that there are many solutions too. But as we bring this month of women to an end, I have no doubt that I would want to challenge each one of us to do more to ensure that the affirmative action bill is passed. I would like to challenge us to do more to end all forms of violence. I would like to challenge us to do more to find the resources to provide shelter for those who need it, to provide legal assistance for those who need it, to ensure that legislations and policies, as they are made, would actually find a way to bring on board matters that have a certain gendered outlook, matters that affect females in one way or the other, but largely also because females make up majority of our population. And soon there will be a census. I'm sure we'll realize that even the 51% is indeed a conservative estimate. It is possible that there are more women than the 51% that we are currently utilizing and using as a basis for most of these arguments that we're making. I have no doubt in my mind that the future is indeed for the woman or is indeed for women. It is fantastic that even on this platform, we've had many women espousing such amazing ideas. And I do hope that we will use this opportunity to harness more of this feminine energy for the positive and to help our society move women to the next level. I've always loved many of these quotations that we all bandied around, but I have a feeling that one of my favorite ones is one by the UK's longest serving female prime minister, herself a fantastic example of the females that we are currently touting as having done a yeoman's job. And she says very simply that any woman who understands the problems of running a home will be nearer to understanding the problems of running a country. And this was by Madam Margaret Thatcher. So certainly when Auntie Mercy speaks, it brings it to light that she knows what she speaks about. She understands the industry she's in. She knows what they need and how it should be done. And I believe that Soji knows the same about what pertains to the health sector and what needs to be done. And as for NCC, I wish you the very best. I believe that you've done a fantastic job under difficult circumstances, but please don't get tired and please don't stop. And certainly we are all here to continue to celebrate quality female leadership, the type that will propel all of us to the next level. Thank you.
Excellent. That was very eloquently articulated. Thank you very much, Honorable Joyce Bawa-Mukhtari. We are trying to bring things to a close, so we'll only take 3 questions. One to Honorable Bawa-Mukhtari, one to Kathleen Addy, and one to Madam Mercy Nijan. So I'll kick off with Honorable Joyce Bawa-Mukhtari. You said a lot, about the need for bipartisan approach in the fight to activate civil society, especially in trying to get some traction on the affirmative action, need for research and all of that, and for us to invest in health. One area that we seem to have struggled in has to do with the matter of appointments of women into leadership, because yes, the affirmative action bill could make some provisions in that area. But you would find that in many political party manifestos, cutting across all the parties, there's always the intent to appoint more women into cabinet, more women into places of decision-making, places of authority. And yet, for some reason, it never really happens. Within CSG, it has to begin from home. Within CSG, we are trying very hard to get a 50% split in terms of the appointment of fellows, in terms of people working in the strategic pillars, in terms of the team, so that we are mainstreaming some of these processes. But how can we get movement at the national level so that we get women who are such great leaders, clearly depicted this evening, into these decision-making spaces? So that's for you.
Well, it's very, very simple. There are some who probably don't have the opportunity to do so. There are others who decline when the opportunities are offered. There are yet others who are never approached. I have always maintained, and I remember in 2008 in particular, the NDC actually had a 50% quota reserved for women, as you said. And I believe the NPP had a similar clause as well. In our case, I recall very well Professor Mills of blessed memory, even said that he had tried to get 30%, and that even with that one, he struggled to find the women to fill up the positions. I know personally women who were offered some of these positions. I remember even using myself as an example. I had many women coming up to me and saying, "Oh, please don't do it. You know, this is difficult. You're in a great environment. You have a good job. You have this, you have that." But, you know, I think also that maybe if we take it from a certain perspective, where we try as much as possible to influence, take advantage of whatever platforms are available, to tell people. I was telling you this morning that sometimes people even think that once you come into politics, you are this very hard chick, you know, and nobody wants to associate with you that much. But I think there are many women. I watched Auntie Joyce Ayi a few days ago. She was a fantastic politician in her day. I remember Haji Hadiza Munkaila of blessed memory, Madame Hawa Yakubu. She was an independent member of parliament. And at least she used to bring this country to a standstill with just that voice. There are many such women still around. I always use my opportunities to encourage women to step up to the plate first. If the kingdom does not open the doors to you, what do? You should take it by force. I've watched how this feminist movement on social media has become a very strong voice, pushing for social change. Let's move from social media, because that is just about 20% of us who are on that platform. Go to other places. Look, if you have more females on the national, on the regional, on the community, and at the decentralized level, I'm sure the challenges we have will certainly be things of the past. Most of our policies will be more gendered, will be more gender sensitive, they'll be more pro-female and pro-child. A lot is being done, but I think in terms of the numbers, they are simply woefully inadequate. No matter how loud the few voices we have, they cannot still achieve all that we want. I would also want us to use platforms such as yours to encourage governments. You know, it is unfortunate that presently, of 16 regional ministers, there's only one female. I simply don't understand. What does it take to be a regional minister? So these are some of the things we need to be asking. You know, when you ask from a politician's perspective, sometimes because maybe people see more the partisan outlook, they probably will not take you as seriously. But I think civil society can make a case for some of these issues beyond the affirmative action bill and all of that. But I think that Ghana has not done too badly, Sergi. To be very honest with you, I believe that when it comes to women empowerment and opportunities for women, check out in most of the CEO areas, middle level, the banks, some of the social, areas, you will find a lot of female leaders at the middle level. I believe that on the political front, we haven't done so well. And we all know reasons why we are struggling, especially at the place where it matters most, where the decisions are being made, where they are being implemented, where they are being influenced. You need to be a really tough woman. You need to be a very, very committed woman, dedicated, and you ought also to have enormous support. And I think that is what we are trying very hard to garner, that women should start looking out for other women where there are opportunities. I have a friend of mine who actually interviews and would always give the opportunity to a well-qualified woman, even where the qualifications are not as high as the ones that she's probably looking for, but come close, she would offer that opportunity to a woman. These are all types of affirmative action in different ways.
So thank you very much, Honorable Muntari, for your submission. You definitely have identified some of the constraints, particularly at the level of the current structure, whether social or economic structure, and also some personal constraints that women have to try to overcome to take up some of these positions. But indeed, I think that this COVID, the various disruptions that it has caused, obviously gives us an opportunity, and we have an opportunity to build, and we have an opportunity to make decisions that will otherwise help us recover well, addressing most of our context challenges. So I hope that as a country, we don't miss this opportunity to rebuild, mindful of the gendered dynamics of the pandemic. So Ms. Addy, I have a question for you that I think is much broader question to almost everyone. In our attempt to kind of harness resources that are available to us as a country to address the pandemic, I think the way the pandemic happened, states tend to look internally. And so while previously we have looked at the diaspora as a resource for us to harness in our development, when it came to the pandemic, I think our strategies were quite silent on what the diaspora can contribute. Maybe it was because we're thinking that members of the diaspora were dealing with their own challenges, and so you don't want to kind of inundate them with demands. But to what extent does our current system really have enough space to accommodate members or Ghanaians outside the country who want to contribute to government attempt to resolving and rebuilding after or rebuilding or recovering from the pandemic? Do you know if there is any institutional approaches there or policy directions?
For people to support any process in Ghana without necessarily going through a government structure. And sometimes that's one of the best ways to work. There are many organizations, many institutions that you can work with that not necessarily have to be government. But then again, as you yourself may know, the diaspora, the Ghanaian diaspora contributes very heavily to development in this country. Remittances form a good chunk of even for what we call foreign direct investment coming into the country for people to use to do things. So for instance, the money that is sent to a family to build a home, to pay school fees, goes a long way to churn the economy, the wheels of the economy. Because when you build a home, artisans get paid and all of that, you purchase things, the money goes back into the economy. So Ghanaians in the diaspora already help in so many ways as much as they can, because I always tell people that Ghanaians are peculiar, maybe because they are the one group of people who move abroad always with the intention of coming back. Very few Ghanaians go away and want to stay away forever. Some people migrate like 100% and don't, but Ghanaians tend to come back. So they spend a lot of money, invest in the country, invest in a pension structure so that they can come back to it. That said, I'm not aware of any particular government structure, but I always tell people that it's neither here nor there whether government has a structure for supporting anything. A few people can organize themselves and get a lot done. So I mean that's all I have to say for that. It doesn't really have to be government at all. We're already doing so. When it comes to COVID in particular, and this pandemic, the pandemic for the first time did not discriminate in terms of response, in terms of how the services that people were getting. Some of the major countries were having even bigger problems than we had. In some of the major countries where the numbers were really high, where lockdowns were really severe and enforced for a long time, where people were dying literally like flies on the streets. They had more problems than we had. So at that point, I don't think that the automatic or go-to solution will be what is it that Ghanaians from abroad can bring to us. Look, what this pandemic has taught us is that we are capable as a country of doing so much more than we have been doing in the past. The fact that we were able to even turn around industries to start producing PPEs and sanitizers alone should tell us that we have the capacity to do so much more. We just over the years have gotten used to the easy way to just buy things that other people have produced. So we are really capable of doing a lot more. I think that before COVID, we should focus on growing industry to serve us, not just in the medical sector, in the education sector as well. Why do we have so much bamboo, for instance, which grows easily, and yet we have a problem with tables and chairs, a shortage of tables and chairs in schools, for instance? Why do we have so many natural building materials? Yes, we are spending so much money trying to construct brick and concrete structures for schools when we could do so much better. If we look inward, we can do a lot. If we look inward, we can generate a lot of income. If we even look at recently in the news, the amount of gold that gets exported out of this country, and the country doesn't actually make any income out of it. If we're able to block all of those things, get our taxation structures properly, in place, get more people, under the tax net, we really will not need as much assistance as we think we do. We are not a poor country in actual fact. We are just, we haven't done the resource management as well as we could have over the years. But I don't think the solution lies in, particularly with this pandemic, looking outward for people to come and help us. I think the solution is being strategic in looking inwards to see what we can do to ensure that our people not just survive, but are able to rise and thrive, throughout this period, and especially when the pandemic is over.
Thank you very much. The solution is inward, but there's still room for Ghanaians in the diaspora to also play a role. I mean, remittances is not just money, but sharing of ideas and also remitting the knowledge also helps to go a long way. So thank you very much. Soji.
Yeah, so thanks. Auntie Mercy, thanks a lot for your presentation. I just wanted to focus on the problem area that you highlighted, going through the administrative processes to access the loan that has been put together by the government. If CSJ is to position itself to support you in this endeavor, at which level are the decisions being made? At which level can we get some traction? Is it at the level of the AMA, the Accra Metropolitan Assembly? Is it at the level of the Greater Accra region? Or is it at the level of the Gender and Women's Ministry? Where do you think that you would need a greater support in unraveling some of these bottlenecks?
Thank you very much. I think we were directed to MBSSI. So the association was dealing with MBSSI. So that is where we pass our loan through, and that is where we send our online application. So I think if we are to follow up, it should be at MBSSI level.
Thank you very much. So we'll connect with you afterwards. And with that, thank you so much for coming. It's been great. Amanda, over to you to close us, please.
So thank you very much to our wonderful panelists. We've tremendously enjoyed your contribution to our topic today. Bash, Hawa, Kathy, and Joyce, and Madame Mercy, we are so grateful that you responded positively to our call, and your presentation has definitely thrown more light on this issue that hitherto we've been discussing amongst ourselves as women. When we meet, we have this chit chat on, hey, how are you holding on? And we've come to accept, oh, we are okay. And as somebody pointed out the last time, I say I am okay because I will not be able to explain the causes of my not being okay. So just to cut it short, I say I am okay, and then we trek on. But definitely our resilience that has brought us this far, and in our various areas, we have been able to lead and also bring along the nation. And we are hoping that this contribution that we have made as women, and as most of you have noted, would also be recollected as we move forward, because we tend to have this idea of glorifying what you have done, but as we move forward, we continue with our approach of marginalizing women and other vulnerable groups. So we at CSJ are particularly interested in issues of social justice, and we are concerned about the marginalized in the society. And so we will continue with our advocacy and to ensure that silent voices in our society are heard, whether in the policy direction or policy making or the implementation of it. And we are grateful that we can count on your expertise from your various professions to help us in ensuring that these voices are also part of the national discourse as we continue to build our country. As Kathy said, there are resources here, and we definitely have to make a cautious effort to identify them and harness them. And Howard, thank you very much for bringing us the story from Tamale. I want to specifically thank you. And because we seem to have focused so much on the cities, and some of us seem to have lost touch with what exactly the effect of this pandemic are outside the cities, and how people outside the major cities are also holding their own and trying to live. So I want to thank you. In the chat box, we had a survey there. So if you can quickly take a look at it and click in and also answer some questions, we'll greatly appreciate that. So for those of you who are also joining us for the first time, you are invited to enroll or join us as a group. We are still growing, and the more people we have, the more strength we will have in ensuring that we are able to achieve the group's objective. So on that note, I know we've exceeded our time, but it was great, and so we couldn't cut it short. I would like to say thank you to all of you who tuned in. And we also like to thank our media partners, Wazo TV, that also carried this dialogue live on Facebook. We have a graphic group of communications and also Metro TV. We would follow up with our panelists once we try to put together a policy paper for government and other actors in the decision-making around these issues that we've talked about. And until our next dialogue series, thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening. Keep safe out there. Check out on your neighbors, and let's keep the communication going and the discussion going. Bye-bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.